first I went to San Francisco because I had I felt lost in Boston, having lost those jobs at the bookstores, and feeling unwell. I mean, not physically as well, basically being severely depressed. And not knowing what it meant, as a matter of fact, because, again, in the Soviet Union, that notion didn't quite exist.
Mm.
So I just knew that I felt horrible, but I didn't know why. You know, I didn't know why, for instance, when I walk out of the house, for instance, my head starts spinning and I start feeling, dizzy and nauseated, and why I feel like great fear just at the thought of getting into a T train, just being in a public place. I had no idea what it was all about, and I don't know what. And on the surface, I looked just fine, but I just couldn't understand what was happening with me. Why at some points I would have like this madly galloping, heartbeat, and have this tremendous fear of whatever it was that I was dying. I had no idea that it was anxiety attacks. I had no idea that what it was all about. So I went to California, where my relatives on my father's side, my father's uncle, or cousin, lived, and with his family, and that was in Palo Alto. So I stayed there for a while, and that was from where I applied to graduate writing program. And there I also worked in a bookstore. It was a great bookstore called Printers Inc. in California Avenue in Palo Alto, which is where Stanford is, Palo Alto. And so it was a great bookstore, and I enjoyed myself being there. But I also was probably on the verge of losing the job as well, because I, again, start missing being there, missing my shifts and so forth, because, again, I felt really unwell. What I actually needed at that point was to have somebody who would tell me that I have depression, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so I applied to the graduate writing program, and then I went, and I was accepted and then I went back to the East Coast, and I was at the University of New Hampshire on the campus there, where I started really writing in English and started getting stories finished and published, and where I first heard from from publishing house editor, who offered to publish a collection of my stories, but then I just on a lark, and a very old friend of mine, close friend of mine, came to visit with me. From Leningrad, my oldest and kind of closest friend. And then he went to California to work, and he applied for political asylum, basically, to stay in the United States. And I had no idea what I was going to do. I had like a couple more months. But I applied, like most people in our program, I applied to Stegner Fellowship at Stanford. That was the thing that everybody applied for.
Mm-hmm.
Because basically, they give you money. They give you money, and they don't ask you to do anything but just to take classes twice a week. It was like above graduate level. So I applied, hoping for nothing, and then they accepted me. And so I went there, and instead of living in Palo Alto, I lived in San Francisco, which is 40 minutes by Caltrain. And back then, San Francisco was still affordable. So this friend of mine and I, we rented a large 2-bedroom apartment. And then his girlfriend came from the Soviet Union and also applied for political asylum. And so
it was still the Soviet Union at that time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Soviet Union ceased existing in 1991.
Okay.
And that was 1989.
Okay.
So, and we paid for that large 2-bedroom apartment in a very heart of the city, Nob Hill, height in Sacramento. I remember very vividly. We paid $800 a month. I remember.
Wow.
Well, it would be like $3,000 now.
Yeah.
And and so in San Francisco, it was great, of course. San Francisco and Stanford were two different things, of course, because at Stanford, I met this great writer whom I translated into Russian, and who I had always wanted to meet, and who was the first to pique my interest in American literature by accident in the Soviet Union. I saw a story of his, and it was Gilbert Sorrentino, who was a professor there at the and some of the strong friendships were formed there in that Stegner workshop. So that was great. There were some difficult moments as well. Not every professor there was somebody that I or others liked, for instance. But basically, we were left to our own devices, and I spent most of my time in San Francisco, where there were, as you can imagine, like lively literary community, lively literary life, and so I met quite a few people, and I started going to literary parties, and I started getting published in some magazines there, and so forth. So that was really great. I changed addresses 4 or 5 times while in the 2.5 years that I spent in San Francisco. But there are periods of time when you spend 2 years and you feel like you spend a lot more. I still feel like San Francisco is a place where I kind of feel like it's my home base, along with New York, somehow, even though I only spent 2.5 years. But now my brother lives there and my mother lives there, so I go there, at least try to go as much as I can. So I do feel comfortable there. I feel like it's the place where I belong. But when I was there, I still felt that it's a faraway place. It's a great place. It's an amazingly interesting and beautiful and lovely place, but since I kind of thought of myself as belonging still to some extent to Russian culture, it's far from Europe by 3 hours, and it's also far, of course, from the East Coast. So you have where still I felt there was all the interesting literary life for me was happening there in the East Coast. So I felt that everything there in San Francisco was kind of wrapped in cotton, as it were. Just everything was sort of like at far remove from. And so when my time there was up, when I got my Stegner fellowships thing done with, I applied for a job, and that's when I got my first job. And then my first job was at the University of Minnesota in the creative writing program, which is the largest university in the United States, as a matter of fact.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's like at that point there were like 65,000 students or something like that.
Wow.
It's a humongous campus. Plus it has campuses in other locations as well. But it's, University of Minnesota at Minneapolis on the border of St. Paul. It's a huge university. So my 2 years in San Francisco were filled with all kinds of things, but there were friends. There were lots of readings. There were great bookstores. I think of that time with tremendous fondness. So I remember many separate days, but if you summarize it, well, that's what you remember, is that it was great. Yeah.
So it was really a turnaround when your friend came and claimed political asylum, and you had someone sort of.
Yeah, but he was also completely new. So he was, we were doing, he was doing some construction work, and then we were looking for instance, at one point I got a call from a Mormon group in the Midwest. They'd contacted local Russian bookstore in San Francisco, whose owner was a close friend of mine, and and they were looking for somebody who could translate the Mormon Bible into Russian. And it was some kind of split group. It was not Utah, right? And so they wanted to, and Russia at that point was wide open. All kinds of religion poured in there.
Right.
It was
unclaimed territory.
Atheist state with full of 150 million people and so forth. And everybody was there: Mormons and Buddhists and Hinduists and everybody, Krishna, everyone was just. So they wanted to get in there, and then but they needed the Russian translation of the Mormon Bible, and so they were looking for someone to do it, and so they called this And she told me that there is this man who just got his degree in English, master's degree, and his English is really good, although it was not nearly as good as now, of course, but nonetheless, as though when he's a native Russian speaker. So, and they called me up and I said, no, I'm not interested. Come on, I'm not a religious person, and I have not. But and that probably that just sort of like got them all the more. They started calling me like every day, but then they never mentioned. And then they said, but we could pay like maybe like, and they named like large, like 20,000. To me, 20,000 is what somebody would say now. 500,000 will pay you for this translation. So you should have said so right away. So, and back then, by the way, 20,000 was quite a bit more money than it is now. $20,000. So this friend of mine and I, we translated. He was doing it mainly. We were just sitting there in San Francisco, and both were like drinking beer and smoking cigarettes, and he would be like typing away on this Mormon Bible, periodically just addressing me. Can you believe this shit? Because it's quite sad. I don't want to insult any possible religion, but man, that Bible, well, essentially, as we know, it's just that the Christianity needed to be rooted in North America at some point. So that's basically what happened. But yeah, it's just attitude towards it's a racist Bible, super. And so I thought so we were just doing that and just like and translating. He was translating faithfully because what's there not to, he also was a literary type and also was in engineering and so forth. So we were both like we were both drinking beer and smoking and I would be watching television and he would be like typing away in the living room and he would just be like, can you believe this shit? And would read me something. So we didn't claim authorship, but if at some point somebody runs into Mormon Bible in Russian, yeah.
Wow, that's an amazing first project to take on.
Yeah, I would like to take on all. We thought that all other religions but no, that didn't happen. Just to translate that. So it was fun. I mean, getting paid $20,000 was a lot of fun.